The rapidly changing age demographics around the globe have finally caught the attention of policy leaders and national government officials in both the so-called developed and the developing world. Quoting Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, aging is widely seen as one of the most significant risks to global prosperity in the decades ahead because of its potentially profound economic, social, and political implications. Global aging in developed and developing countries alike will dramatically alter the way that societies and economies work. And indeed, the WHO reports that between 2000 and 2050, the proportion of the world's population over 60 years will double from about 11% to 22%. The number of people aged 60 years and over is expected to increase from 605 million to 2 billion over the same period. 80% of older people will live in low and middle income countries. Chile, China, and the Islamic Republic of Iran will have a greater proportion of older people than the United States of America. The number of older people in Africa will grow from 54 million to 213 million. It's also very important to note that already, even in the poorest countries, the biggest killers are not communicable disease, but heart disease, stroke, and chronic lung disease, while the greatest causes of disability are visual impairment, dementia, hearing loss, and osteoarthritis. So you can see the important relationship between environment and health is pertinent to this population as well. At the global level, there are two factors that combined have led to the current demographic shift. First one is declining birth rates. I hope that it was meant to give a little chuckle on that slide. And the second one, of course, is increased life expectancy. This is Tithonus. You may know about Tithonus. Fell in love with a daughter of Zeus. She asked Zeus to give him, let him live forever, which he did, but she also forgot to ask for good health. So he became increasingly decrepit as the centuries went on. At the local level, the actual median age of a community is determined by another significant trend, that is migration, the movement of people in and out of community, a city, a nation state. When young people leave, the median age of a community rises, and 30% of all migrants are under the age of 30. Klaus Schwab, echoing many world leaders, notes that the lack of institutionalized pension systems is a chief barrier to the well-being of elders, especially in light of changing family patterns and the loss of traditional supports. The cost of instituting change through developing robust pension and healthcare systems is often characterized as a potentially catastrophic silver tsunami that will overwhelm world economies. Gloom and doom is the standard assertion, as one can infer from the titles of two influential books on the subject, Pete Peterson's Gray Dawn and Ted Fishman's Shock of Gray. Yet, while much of the discourse around the challenge of societal aging is framed in national and now global economic terms, aging is essentially a local phenomenon. It's a well-known fact among gerontologists that the primary concern of the vast majority of older people is to simply manage at home as long as possible. For older people, health is not health care, but rather being at home. In taking a social justice approach to the position of elders in their home communities, it's worthwhile to start with first principles, the cultural underpinnings and assumptions that guide our allocation of resources to address the so-called problems of aging. That older people are a social problem is a given in the silver tsunami model. Similarly, at the individual level, in the United States at least, aging is seen as a personal problem, to be dreaded on the one hand and derided on the other. In short, we have made aging problematic at both the societal and the individual level. So given the problematic status of old people, how do we generate solutions? How do we respond? I would argue we typically employ the same paradigms and ideologies that define solutions in other realms. These are the ideologies of biomedicine and capitalism. Biomedicine positions the older person as a body. Capitalism positions the older person as a consumer. Both paradigms atomize the population into an aggregate of individuals. It's no accident these two paradigms overlap in many ways. The delivery of health care to older people closely follows a consumer model, as one can infer from the constant barrage of new anti-aging products and services. The delivery of products and services to individual bodies masks social and cultural factors that operate on the collective, on the group. Through monetizing the path towards well-being in later life, it's no wonder that, given the massive demographic changes, we would use the phrase silver tsunami to characterize the coming wave. Yet the fear of aging at both the individual and the societal levels conveniently fuels the growth of capital. What if we were to position the older person not as an individual body, but as a member of a commons? Well, for one thing, our healthcare systems would take on a very different character, as reflected in this chart. On the left are aspects of the healthcare system based on a clinical or a biomedical model of aging. On the right are elements of a healthcare system that would be based on an understanding of aging as a place-based phenomenon, as a community phenomenon. In the former, we would reimburse for acute care, which is what we do, as opposed to reimburse for chronic care, which is traditionally underfunded. We would hold a disease model of old age rather than seeing aging as a natural entropic process. We focus on longevity and anti-aging medicine as opposed to the quality of remaining years. We focus on disease research rather than the basic biology of aging. We focus on cure and not care. Our approach is reactive and corrective rather than preventive. We focus on diagnosis rather than function. We see the unit of service as a patient as opposed to a community member. And we see that the services, what we do is embedded in services as opposed to community building. Seeing the older person as a member of a community provides an alternative paradigm for thinking about solutions to the so-called problem of age. In fact, there are two economies available to older persons. The dominant economy, mass market capitalism, where the elder is a consumer, meets the needs of the individual through the distribution of goods and services from the outside through the currency of money. An alternative economy, where the elder is a producer, meets the needs of the individual through providing access to shared goods and services through the currency of mutuality and reciprocity. In the market economy, the elder without currency is placed in a dependent role in society. Where the market fails, public policies, beneficence, and altruism may fill the gap, but it really does not change the position of the elder, since she is still on the receiving end. Payment by the elder in those cases entails a provision of gratitude and deference, reinforcing the definition of the situation as one of dependence. In multiple ways, we have commodified old age by coming to define this period of life as one of consumption rather than production. The market economy is also extremely adept at siphoning off discretionary income by identifying positive aging with leisure. That majority of older adults who don't have significant amounts of discretionary income are, nevertheless, seen as individual consumers, perhaps of essential, albeit life-giving services, as the chart above suggests. Public and private insurance systems are organized around individuals, not collective needs. The basic needs of daily life, housing, transportation, healthcare, and food in the U.S. consume a large percentage of the income of ordinary older people. 30% of elderly renters are paying more than half their incomes on housing. Those who are low-income renters face the greatest difficulties, as they often have little wealth or savings when they retire. The typical homeowner over age 65 has enough wealth to cover nursing home costs for 42 months and enough non-housing wealth to last 15 months. Yet, alternatively, the median older renter cannot afford even 1 month in a nursing home. The American Automobile Association reports that the cost of owning and maintaining a standard vehicle is $9,000 annually. In 2010, Medicare beneficiaries spent over $4,000 out of their own pockets for health care spending. Food inflation in the United States averages 2.5% per year in a year in which no cost of living raise was provided to Social Security beneficiaries. So how do older people pay for these things? Well, where median income for individuals 65 plus was $22,000 in 2014, 47% of unmarried persons over the age of 65 rely on Social Security for 90% of their income. And the average annual Social Security benefit in 2014 was a little over $15,000. In short, 25 million or 40% of older Americans age 60 plus are economically insecure. 1/3 of senior households has no money left over each month or is in debt. Among senior households in debt, the median total debt was approximately $41,000. Oops, I think I went too far there. 3 million senior households experience food insecurity. 3.5 million are underwater on their mortgages and have no income. Older renters are most at risk for being economically insecure, and they are disproportionately single women and minority households. But this is a conference on livable cities, so it's fair to ask whether planning and community design have contributed to challenges older people face worldwide. The answer is an unqualified yes. Let's point to retail redlining. The history of food retailing in urban areas is one of continuous disinvestment in urban cores and increased investment in urban food outlets. Seeking more affluent customers, cheaper land on which to build 50,000 square feet retail centers, and catering to shoppers in cars, the retail food industry has literally left urban elders on their own to seek nutritious, low glycemic, and fresh foods. Too often, food choices in low-income urban communities have been limited to non-fresh, more expensive foods. Declines in property values have led to declines in educational resources and the disappearance of home economics courses in school that might support healthy food traditions. The manufacturing base of many urban communities, of course, the traditional base of the economy, has deserted urban areas, typically through the so-called modern practice of planning and zoning. Secondly, let's point to what may be the most significant historical element of community planning affecting the current generation of older adults in the U.S., suburbanization. Over the past 50 years, the corollary to disinvestment in urban centers has been massive suburbanization and the flow of capital from urban centers to the margins. Having been ensnared by the lure of the suburbs decades ago, millions of older adults in the U.S., 7 in 10, now live in homogeneous, isolating, naturally occurring retirement neighborhoods, too often devoid of children, adequate public transportation, walkable access to health services, entertainment, third places, and fresh food. The current public health admonition to individuals, eat healthy and exercise, is hardly comforting in the face of significant structural barriers, including classism, racism, ageism, and disastrous public planning. Even more egregious, we blame the older population itself for this unfortunate circumstance. By medicalizing, this is a quote from Eisenhower, by medicalizing the effects of poverty, oppression, abandonment, segregation, and ghettoization, the behavioral medical approach both reflects and reproduces the existing social order by endorsing an interpretation of health and disease which places responsibility for the pathological effects of these conditions on individuals. Rarely are capitalism and the decline of urban planning discipline of urban planning held responsible for our inability to assure a good old age for Earth's inhabitants. Is there some reason for optimism? Well, yes, for the field of urban planning, recent policy statements and a guide to aging in place have been published by the American Planning Association, indicates maybe the age-friendly community movement is starting to grow up a little bit. And this movement is a global phenomenon taking root around the world. The WHO Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities currently includes 287 cities and communities in 33 countries. Moreover, the negative public health consequences of both inner-city disinvestment and suburbanization are widely recognized by the field of urban planning, although tangible solutions have yet to get beyond the demonstration phase. As for the role of capitalism in enabling quality of life for a significant portion of the older adult population, I am less sanguine. Given its basic premise about human nature, its unit of analysis, its focus on profit maximization, and its targeting of individual consumers with money, many, if not most older adults around the planet will not be well served. In the commons, however, the elder can escape the monetary trap as well as the indignities of charity. The market economy is an ownership economy. The sharing economy is an access economy, providing access to goods and services which are not owned. The two economies engender radically different forms of transaction and human interaction. In the sharing economy, things are not bought and sold so much as bartered and shared. Consumption is collaborative. These are some of the phrases that are au courant these days in describing what we call the sharing economy. I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. The sharing economy is not so much a new invention as so much as a rediscovery of the operating principles long practiced in traditional communities. It's exploding around the world, and its force is now driven by the availability of digital platforms that serve as intermediaries for communication. Regretfully, many innovations are being monetized, such as Uber and Lyft. Yet a wide variety of grassroots projects, usually local in character, are bringing people into the commons through the expenditure of social, human, and cultural capital and the use of open source platforms. At the local level, intermediaries and brokers are less important, as face-to-face relationships can be employed to share and exchange. This factor should loom all important to practitioners of urban design. When thinking about what assets can be mobilized by older people to meet their needs for goods and services outside of the monetary economy, several come to mind: time, talent, and treasure. Millions of older people have billions of hours to dedicate to the commons. In this growing movement called time banking, every individual's hour is as valuable as the next. An hour given generates an hour to be received. An elder instructs an hour in music, receives an hour in return from someone in the commons, perhaps an oil change, maybe a house cleaning. An hour tutoring a teen garners an hour of window cleaning. Talent. One of the injustices of the digital economy is the invalidation and obsolescence of the knowledge of older persons. Increasingly, basic access to goods, services, and information requires digital literacy. Despite the growing use of computers by older adults, the rapid changes in the digital world make it ever more difficult for older people and other disadvantaged groups to keep up. Yet experienced people retain a vast pool of knowledge about human affairs and a vast pool of pragmatic experience that in a sharing economy have lasting value. There are more than 1,000 repair cafes around the world where people can bring appliances, toys, furniture, bicycles, and other items and find experienced individuals who will freely repair and teach important daily living skills. Lastly, treasure. I don't mean that in the traditional sense. While older people with discretionary income are often generous with their money, in the sharing economy, their treasure may include a lifetime of accumulated physical assets that can be shared. These assets can fuel many types of local sharing programs: garden share, tool share, car share, house share, shared storage. In an ownership society, these assets are meant to accrue to successful individual consumers. In an access economy, a sharing economy, these assets can enter the commons and be utilized by many more individuals. If actions in the sharing economy have the potential to benefit elders and other marginalized groups to transcend the limits of capitalism, it's worth considering how principles of the commons can inform urban planning and design. While the design of public spaces that integrate all ages and abilities is certainly on display here at this conference, I'd add as a note that design for the commons is not authentic unless it is also designed with the commons. A city is only just when the experts turn over not only the power to govern, but also the power to co-design and co-create itself. Effective answers to the following questions are more likely to occur if elders are actually engaged in the process of asking and answering them. So I want you to think about this if you're a designer. How can the evanescent and sociable interchanges in a public common space, which are so important, be transformed into more enduring relationships of mutual benefit? How can the assets of elders, time, talent, and treasure, be made known to community members who might wish to develop a sharing relationship? In other words, how does design demonstrate what older people have to offer our society? How can elders learn to connect and stay up to date with changing digital platforms? What design elements help elders occupy common space over time so that a presence can be attained? What design factors limit the participation of elders in common spaces? What design factors engender and facilitate interaction across generations and other forms of difference? How can designers compensate for the sensory and physical capacities and/or limitations that might prevent inclusion of older adults in the commons? If holding memory valorizes the role of elders in our communities, how can a city remember itself? And on the reverse, how can elders be authentically included in our futures? That's my close.